I'm Sloane. I'm 36. And 3 weeks ago, I walked onto the stage where my mother was launching her memoir about my suicide attempt, connected my phone to the theater's projection system, and showed 200 paying customers the comment section from her blog where strangers had called 14-year-old me a drama queen while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. But that's the end, or the closest thing to an end I've found. To understand why I spent 20 years erasing myself from the internet, only to become the lawyer who wrote the laws that finally made my mother obsolete, why I changed my name, and my city and my face in photographs, why I stood in a spotlight I had spent my adult life avoiding and felt nothing, but the cold satisfaction of a contract finally enforced. You have to understand the economy of childhood in the early internet. The way some mothers didn't raise children. They raised content. I was 7 when my mother started her blog. It was 2003. The word blog still sounded like something you might cough up. My mother, Petra Miller, was a stay-at-home mother with a journalism degree she had never used and a hunger for attention she had never named. She bought a domain name, Petra and Sloane.com, and she began to write about me, about everything, about my first steps, which she had videoed and uploaded to a server that groaned under the weight of 3 megabytes, about my first words, which were more and which she interpreted as evidence of my precocious materialism, about my first day of school, photographed from behind a chain-link fence like a paparazzo stalking a celebrity, my backpack too big, my face streaked with tears I hadn't known were being archived for strangers. She called it honest parenting. She called it breaking the silence. She called it letting other mothers know they're not alone. What she didn't call it was monetization. What she didn't call it was conversion rates. What she didn't call it was the transformation of a child into a character, a narrative arc, a product that could be refreshed daily and sold to advertisers who wanted to reach mothers exactly like her. By the time I was 10, Petra had a book deal. Petra and Sloane, A Year of Honest Days. It was a compilation of blog entries with photographs she had taken of me without my knowledge or consent. Me in the bathtub at 4, my body visible through bubbles she hadn't bothered to arrange strategically. Me crying at a birthday party where no one had come, my face swollen, the caption reading, Teaching Sloane Resilience. Me asleep in her bed after a nightmare, my thumb in my mouth, my underwear visible. The page facing an advertisement for organic cotton pajamas. She read passages aloud at her launch event, while I sat in the front row in a dress she had chosen, smiling when she looked at me, because I had learned that my face was part of the performance, and that failure to perform resulted in what she called consequences, and what I later recognized as emotional withdrawal so complete it felt like abandonment. I was 12 when I started my diary. Not a blog. A physical notebook with a lock that Petra had given me for Christmas, probably because it photographed well in the gift guide she was compiling. I wrote in it at night, under my covers, with a flashlight that made the pages glow like evidence. I wrote about hating my body, which Petra had documented developing since I was 8 with monthly growth updates that included measurements and photographs in underwear. I wrote about wanting to die, which I didn't really want, but which felt like the only language I had for wanting to disappear from a life that was being consumed by strangers. I wrote about a boy named Tyler who had touched my hand in the hallway and how that touch felt like the first real thing in a world where everything else was performance. I was 13 when Petra found the diary. I don't know how. I kept it hidden in a box of tampons I wasn't old enough to use, behind the radiator in my closet in a space I thought was mine. But Petra had a gift for finding boundaries and crossing them. She had built a career on it. I came home from school to find her at the kitchen table, the diary open, her laptop beside it, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the efficiency of someone who had recognized opportunity. "Sloane," she said, not looking up. "This is important. This is what mothers need to see. The darkness. The reality. The things we don't talk about." I didn't understand. Not until the next morning when I checked her blog before school, a habit I had developed like checking for weather, like checking for damage after a storm, and found a new entry. My daughter hates herself, what mommy bloggers don't say. It was my diary. Scanned. Posted in full. My handwriting visible, my name at the top of each page. My 13-year-old cursive leaning hard to the left like it was trying to escape the frame. Petra had added commentary. Analysis. Sloane's struggle with body image reflects the toxic culture we live in, but also my own failure to model self-acceptance. Her suicidal ideation is a cry for help that I, as an honest mother, am answering by sharing this with you. Please comment with your own stories. Let's break the silence together. The comments came in waves. 200 in the first hour. 500 by the end of the day. Strangers analyzing my body, my mind, my worth as a daughter. Sloane needs therapy, not a blog post. This is exploitation, Petra. No, this is courage. My daughter is the same way and I thought I was alone. Sloane is a drama queen. I was suicidal at 13 and I didn't write emo poetry about it. Petra, you're a terrible mother. Petra, you're saving lives. I didn't go to school that day. I sat in the bathroom and I read every comment. I memorized the worst ones. I carved them into my arm with a safety pin I found in Petra's sewing kit because the physical pain was easier than the realization that my interior life, my only interior life, the only space I thought was mine, had become a public forum. That my mother had not just read my diary. She had published it. She had sold it. She had sold me. I tried to kill myself a week later. Not because I wanted to die. Because I wanted to stop being content. Because I thought, in the logic of a 13-year-old who had never been allowed private grief, that death was the only way to end a narrative that was no longer hers to control. I took pills from Petra's medicine cabinet. Antidepressants prescribed for the anxiety she had diagnosed herself with after a negative review of her book. I swallowed them with water from the tap and I lay down on my bed and I waited for the silence. Petra found me, not because she checked on me, because she came to photograph my room for a mental health awareness post she was planning. She saw me. She called 911. And while I was unconscious in the hospital, while doctors pumped my stomach and I dreamed of nothing, she posted a photograph. It was taken from the doorway of my hospital room. I was visible in the background, tubes in my nose, my face gray against white sheets. In the foreground, Petra's hand held mine, her wedding ring catching the light. The caption, *, the worst night of my life. But if sharing Sloane's pain saves one mother from missing the signs, then this horror has meaning. *, it won an award, the Mommy Media Award for Courage in Vulnerability. Petra accepted it on stage in a red dress while I sat in the front row, still pale, still nauseous from the medication, still unable to look at a screen without feeling my stomach lurch. She thanked me in her speech. Sloane taught me that honesty is the only way through. The audience applauded. I smiled. I had learned that my face was part of the performance. I left at 18. Not gradually, not with preparation. I waited until Petra was at a conference. Building Your Brand Through Authentic Struggle. I remember the title, and I packed a duffel bag with clothes, and the cash I had saved from jobs she didn't know about, jobs I had found through friends whose parents didn't blog. I went to the courthouse, and I filed for name change. Sloane Miller became Sloane Chen, my father's name, a man Petra had erased from the narrative so completely that I barely remembered his face. I went to a state college 3,000 miles away. I deleted every social media account. I learned to appear in no photographs. I became, deliberately and systematically, a person who did not exist in searchable form. I became a lawyer because I needed to understand the architecture of consent. I needed to know why a 13-year-old's diary could be published without her permission. I needed to understand why my body, photographed in bathtubs and hospital beds, belonged legally to the person who held the copyright on the camera. I studied privacy law, media law, the emerging field of digital rights for minors. I wrote papers that were cited by legislators. I testified before committees. I helped draft laws that said, finally, that a child's likeness could not be monetized without a trust fund in the child's name, that content created before the age of 13 could be removed at the subject's request, that the right to be forgotten applied to childhoods that had been archived without consent. I was 30 when I married David. He was a librarian, a man who understood the weight of information and the ethics of access. We had twins when I was 28, Milo and Iris, and I made a choice that Petra would have found incomprehensible. I did not photograph them. I did not name them online. Their birth certificates were sealed. Their existence was known only to people who knew us in physical space, who could be trusted with the gravity of their presence. Petra didn't know. I had spent 12 years ensuring she couldn't find me, using legal tools I had helped create, and I had no intention of breaking that seal. Then, last year, I found the blog, not Petra's original blog, that still existed, archived, preserved by fans who called it pioneering and foundational to mommy blogging culture. I had learned to ignore it, to not search my old name, to treat my previous existence as a closed case file. This was new. New platform, a new aesthetic, a new Petra. She was Grandma Petra now, silver-haired and soft focus, writing about the healing power of grandmotherhood and redeeming the mistakes of the past. And in her sidebar under Current Joys were photographs of Milo and Iris. I felt the old nausea immediately, the lurch of the stomach, the sense of the floor becoming liquid. I clicked through. The entries were dated over the past year. Petra had found them. She didn't explain how. She wrote about the miracle of reconnection, about forgiveness across generations, about the grandchildren I never knew I had. She had photographs of them at a park I recognized, a park 3 blocks from our apartment. She had written about their personalities, their habits, their fears. Iris was sensitive like her mother. Milo was a little performer just like Grandma. She had been watching them, for a year, without my knowledge, without my consent, and she had been publishing them. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone. I sat at my kitchen table and I read every entry and then I read the comments, and then I read the About page where Petra described her new book. Asterisk the daughter I couldn't save. A mommy blogger's redemption. Asterisk the launch event was scheduled for a theater in Brooklyn. A live interview with adult children of influencers who had found healing through public dialogue. The panel was paid. The tickets were $75. The description promised an honest conversation about the costs of digital transparency. I spent a year preparing, not emotionally. I had spent 20 years on that preparation. I spent a year on the legal architecture. I found 5 other adults who had been children on Petra's blog. A boy named Marcus, whose toilet training had been documented in video. A girl named Aisha, whose tomboy phase had been Petra's most popular series in 2007, who was now a trans man named Aaron, who had never consented to having his pre-transition body archived. A woman named Bethany, whose childhood illness, documented in graphic detail, including photographs of rashes and vomit, had been compiled into a medical resource that still appeared in search results for her symptoms. A boy named David, whose ADHD diagnosis had been live blogged, including videos of his medication-induced stupor. A girl named Fatima, whose religious questioning at 15 had been published as a mother's struggle with faith, resulting in her estrangement from her community. They were all willing to testify. They were all like me, living in the aftermath of a childhood that had been consumed in real time. We built a case. Not just against Petra, but against the platform that hosted her, the archival services that preserved her, the theater that profited from her. We obtained preliminary injunctions. We prepared a presentation that was legally airtight and emotionally devastating, but I didn't want to win in court. I wanted to win in her space. In the theater she had rented. In front of the audience she had sold tickets to. I wanted her to feel what I had felt at 13, the sudden, vertiginous realization that your interior life has become public property, that the walls you thought were solid are actually glass, that the people watching are not friends but consumers. I bought a ticket. I told no one except David, who understood without explanation. I arrived early and I sat in the middle of the theater, visible but unremarkable, a woman in a gray blazer with her hair pulled back and her face composed into the expression I used for depositions. The event began with Petra on stage, radiant in a blue dress that matched the color scheme of her new website. She spoke about the early days of honest parenting, about the mistakes we made before we knew better, about the healing that comes from owning our stories. She introduced the panel, 4 adults who smiled with the careful neutrality of people who had signed non-disclosure agreements and were being paid for their presence. They spoke about forgiveness and understanding and the complexity of maternal love in the digital age. Then she announced a surprise. A new chapter of her book, never before shared. She projected it on the screen behind her. It was about Milo and Iris, about finding them, about watching them, about the redemption of grandmotherhood. And there, on the screen, was a photograph of Iris crying in a bathroom stall, her face contorted, her school uniform visible. Petra had obtained it somehow, hacked a private parent portal, bribed a classmate I still don't know, and she was sharing it as evidence of her reconnection with her estranged family. I stood up. The theater was small enough that my movement was visible. Petra saw me. Her face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, calculation, and finally, the performance of maternal joy that she had perfected over decades. "Sloane," she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. Oh my God, Sloane. I walked to the stage, not quickly, not slowly, with the deliberate pace of someone who had rehearsed this moment for 20 years. I reached into my blazer pocket and I pulled out my phone. I had already connected to the theater's projection system. David had helped me identify the wireless frequency, a small betrayal of his professional ethics that he had made without hesitation. Hello, Petra, I said. My voice was steady. I had practiced it in mirrors, in courtrooms, in the quiet of my own home while my children slept. My name is Sloane Chen, formerly Sloane Miller. I am the daughter of Chapter 1, the suicide attempt of Chapter 3, the worst night of your life that won you an award. The audience murmured. Petra's smile faltered, then steadied. She was already calculating, already planning her response, already preparing to frame this as a moment of healing that she could write about later. I continued, the lawyer who drafted the Chen Miller Digital Privacy Act, which takes effect in the state next month. And I am here to serve you with a preliminary injunction prohibiting the publication, distribution, or monetization of any content involving minors without documented informed consent, and a secured trust fund in the minor's name. I held up the document. The theater's lights caught the official seal, but I didn't stop. I tapped my phone and the screen behind Petra changed, no longer her projected chapter. Now it was her original blog, the diary entry, my handwriting, my 13-year-old cursive, my name at the top of each page, side by side with the comments. Drama queen. Attention seeker. Petra should control her better. This is child abuse. This is courage. 200 strangers analyzing my body, my mind, my worth as a daughter, while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. Then more, the bathtub photographs, the hospital photograph, the growth updates with measurements. The video of David, the other David, the panelist, staring blankly at a camera while Petra narrated his medication journey. The photographs of Aisha that still appeared in search results for tomboy phase. The medical photographs of Bethany's rashes. The toilet training video of Marcus. This, I said, is what you called honest parenting. This is what you called vulnerability. This is what you built your career on. And this, I tapped again, and the screen showed Petra's emails with the detective she had hired to find my children, the payments she had made, the private school portal she had accessed illegally, is what you are still doing. Not healing, not redeeming, consuming. I turned to the audience. 200 faces, some shocked, some already recording on their phones. I am not here for your sympathy. I am here for your understanding. Every person on that screen was a child who could not consent. Every click, every comment, every share was a transaction in which we were the product and you were the consumers, and I am here to tell you that the market is closed. I introduced the others. Marcus stood up from the third row, Aaron from the back. Bethany, David, Fatima, they walked to the stage, not with the practiced smiles of Petra's panel, but with the raw, unpracticed presence of people who had never been allowed to appear without a script. We stood together, 6 adults who had been children on the internet before anyone understood what that meant, and we faced the audience in silence. Petra tried to speak. She tried to say my name, to reach for the narrative, to reframe this as a moment of growth that she could write about. I didn't let her. I simply held up my phone one more time, and the screen showed the final image. A legal document, filed that morning, class action status granted, naming Petra Miller, her publisher, her platform, and her archive services as defendants. The lawsuit that would not destroy her. She had structured her assets too carefully for that, but would make it impossible for her to profit from us ever again. I walked off the stage. Not quickly, not slowly, with the deliberate pace of someone who had finally, after 20 years, reached the end of a performance she had never agreed to give. The others followed. We didn't look back. We didn't need to. The silence behind us was not the silence of an audience moved by maternal courage. It was the silence of a market that had just understood its product had developed consciousness. Petra declared bankruptcy within 6 months. The book was pulped. The blog was removed, though archives persisted, as archives always do in the dark corners of the internet where nothing truly dies. But the law I had helped write took effect, and other children began to find the tools to reclaim their images, their stories, their childhoods from the adults who had consumed them. I didn't win exactly. Petra still exists. She still writes on smaller platforms to smaller audiences about the persecution of honest mothers. She still has fans. She still has a narrative, but she no longer has me. She no longer has Milo and Iris, whose names and faces remain unsearchable, whose childhood belongs to them alone. Milo asked me last month about his grandmother. We were walking in the park where Petra had photographed them, the same park, and he asked why we never visited her, why she wasn't in his life, why other children had grandmothers who baked cookies and told stories, and his was only a name he had heard whispered by adults who thought he wasn't listening. I sat on a bench, and I pulled him onto my lap, and I told him the truth. Not the whole truth, he is 8 and some complexities are adult weight, but the truest version I could manage. Your grandmother, I said, believed that loving someone meant showing them to the world. She loved me that way, and it hurt me, because I needed to be shown only to myself. I needed to grow without an audience. And when I became a mother, I decided that you and Iris would grow in private, so that when you are ready to show yourselves to the world, it will be your choice. Not mine, not anyone's. Milo thought about this. He has his father's capacity for silence, for letting ideas settle before he responds. So she loved you wrong, he said finally. Yes, I said. She loved me wrong, and I spent a long time being angry about that. But anger is also an audience, Milo. Anger means she still has my attention, and I decided to give my attention to you instead. He nodded, satisfied, and slid off my lap to chase a pigeon that had landed too close. I watched him run, his body small and unobserved and entirely his own, and I felt something I had not expected. Not victory, not closure. The simple, unremarkable piece of a life that belonged to the people living it. That's my story. If someone ever sold your childhood for content, if someone ever called your pain their authenticity, if someone ever told you that love meant being watched, hear me. You are not a story. You are not a lesson. You are not the vehicle for someone else's redemption or their brand or their healing journey. You are the right to be forgotten. You are the right to be private. You are the right to grow in spaces that are not photographed, to cry in rooms that are not live-streamed, to become yourself without an audience scoring your progress. You are not content. You are the person who finally, after everything, gets to choose what to create.